Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to not a DM's Guild review, nor a Roll20 review, but a DriveThruRPG review. Every once in a while I expand beyond covering D&D and Pathfinder. Now this is also a special two-part video review. First I'll review Investigations in Androids, which is a cyberpunk conversion rules set for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, followed by Offworld Colony, which is an adventure based on that rule set. Both PDFs are designed by D.O. Sebastian. Review copies have been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my videos, consider using my affiliate links for your DM's Guild shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/RogueWatson. Shout out to Platinum patrons Andrew, Brian, Richard, and Joe. And Gold patrons RPG Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, Pretty Boy, and Yuma, Marcos, David, Vicente, Gilberto, Sean, aka Cert2B, Adam, Dead Lizard Lounge, and Aukshi. Thank you all very much for your support. Cyberpunk. I love cyberpunk. I grew up on a lot of 80s movies. I read a lot of Philip K. Dick. It's a really fun setting. So much so that for those of you that have been following our channel and our own tabletop adventures for quite a while, know that when I started DMing online and recording those sessions, we started with Shadowrun because I was knee-deep into playing the Harebrained Schemes Shadowrun games. I just adored that setting so much. I thought it was such a cool role-playing universe. The problem was, none of us particularly enjoyed the Shadowrun 5th edition rules. They are very complex. There's a lot of modifiers involved. It's the way you have to roll just a bunch of like 1,000 sixes and then see those successes on those sixes. We tried to run little adventures. I had a lot of fun writing them and playing through them. They're all, you can see on my YouTube channel, with varying degrees of success. We just didn't like the rules. And at the same time, D&D 5th edition had just basically come out as brand new and was blowing away the competition in terms of it is streamlined and really easy to play and all that. So, long story short, we switched to D&D and really haven't looked back. What Investigations in Androids does is it takes the Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition rules and converts them into a cyberpunk setting, a theme. It is the video game equivalent would be like a total conversion mod, which is you take the base code or gameplay of the game, use all those systems, but then re-flavor them and re-theme them into cyberpunk. And you'll have to switch some things around, but it's actually amazing how well that D&D 5th edition rule set can be converted, because it's really loose in that way that it can be converted into all these other ways. In fact, I think in the DMG there's actually rules for doing like guns and grenades and all that if you want to introduce that kind of stuff into your game. I was actually blown away by how well first of all, how well it's put together. It's extremely professional. The way it's designed and organized is amazing. You can see here it's 83 pages long. It covers, what's nice is it focuses on the things that specifically are relevant to creating a cyberpunk, noir, very Blade Runner-ish, Shadowrun, whichever you like, system. So it specifically has things about androids, the fact that you can play an android, the fact that you can play an android that you don't know you're an android, and there's different rules for all of that. Androids have a few, obviously, extra abilities. Vehicles become a thing obviously with this universe. You can pilot vehicles. There's a whole chase sequence because obviously chasing after people and having people follow you are a big thing in noir mystery plots. There's they call them biomods here. I think Shadowrun equivalent is like augmentations. It's our Deus Ex, whatever you want to call it. I think Shadowrun has them too. You can have weapons that have those rules. All these attachments for those things. There are some new items. So it focuses specifically on the new stuff and doesn't necessarily try to convert every last rule, but it's amazing how well those rules can actually be converted. So spells, for example, become tech powers. You use like nanorobots to do, a lot of the different spell effects. I think a few things require a drone, which is kind of an extra thing that you have to keep up with for spellcast for tech power purposes, but otherwise it doesn't try to reinvent things, which I think is a really smart, really clever way of handling the conversion. And it speaks to the core theme of D&D 5th edition, which is just keep shit simple. Like, just get to the gameplay. Don't bog shit down with a lot of extraneous rule sets. And I think this works very, very well for that. It does convert every single race. true to more stringent cyberpunk stuff, which I always thought, the big sci-fi ones are cyberpunk, which is kind of Earth-focused, and usually it's a future that's basically mostly Earthbound, and then you have like the space opera, which is all about aliens, and you're flying around spaceships. It's a Star Wars shit. This one uses a little bit of a combination of that. It almost feels like more like The Expanse, where humanity has left to colonize at least the solar system. Which example, the Offworld colony speaks to a space station above Europa. But it's still all human. There's no aliens involved. So it converts all of the races into basically humans from different regions, which is how kind of The Expanse does it, where you've got humans that are now basically from from Mars, and you've got the ones from Earth, and then you've got the ones from the Belt. This one has different, all the different races. It's a little less as exciting as being able to play, alien races or those things with a lot of other sci-fi packs, but I think it speaks more true to the cyberpunk setting. Classes is pretty much the only thing I was disappointed with here, in that there were only 4 classes that are converted. Now, the conversion is really, really well done, and I appreciate that we were given quality over quantity when it comes to the classes, but 4 just feels like it's kind of low. I am going to go through this very, very briefly in terms of all these different stages. I'm kind of giving an overarching thing at the beginning now, just so you've got my general feelings about it. I'm not going to go through all 80 pages, but I think it's really, really well done. I was extremely impressed with how well the rule sets are molded onto a sci-fi setting, and how the designer has specifically looked at the important elements and plot points and traits that make up a good cyberpunk mystery noir story. And then I will get into the adventure, which is fantastic. The Offworld Colony adventure is utterly amazing. My only complaint there is that it is part 1 of 4, and I need those other parts, because I was really impressed with how well it's put together, how well it's organized, how well it uses all the different core pillars of good RPG gameplay, which is a good solid balance and mixture of combat, exploration, and role-playing. The fact that each chapter has its own overarching story, the fact that the mystery is actually interesting. It's got multiple factions, like a Fallout video game, where you can choose which factions you want to work for. It's really good. It's really good, and we're going to look at it in a second. First, let's look at investigations and androids, which these are, again, 2 different products on the DriveThruRPG. This one is the actual rule set, and then the other one, Offworld Colony, is the adventure, but the adventure requires this rule set, which is why I'm kind of reviewing them together. Let's see. So we've got androids, which is a big part of a lot of cyberpunk adventures, or like the Alien series. That was a big thing about androids. There's a good bit about if your player wants to create an android, you have to roll first if they're going to be an android, and then you roll another roll to see if they know that they're an android or not, which is really great, and another really fun trope of these kind of anything with an android, the fact that players maybe don't know they're an android themselves. And as the GM, you can roll in secret whenever the players do certain things to determine whether they figure that out. And there's, of course, a test that you can called the VK test, where essentially you can try to figure out if somebody is an android. And yes, this does play into the adventure at some point. One of the faction quests, you have to determine which of 4 or 5 people is an android, and you have to administer this test. And it's basically just a bunch of skill checks and things, but I think it's really well done, and I think that's a really fun element of these stories that doesn't necessarily translate in terms of a convert. I mean, you have doppelgangers in D&D, but that's not really the same thing. So I like that there were some extra rules given here, but they still don't feel too rulesy. It's not too complex or confusing. I was already on board with kind of how these things work and the different advantages and disadvantages that androids have. Interestingly, the disadvantages are mainly like societal, because androids, a lot of people don't trust them or treat them as second-class citizens and all that. So they're actually physically, they have a lot of advantages. For example, you can survive in space, the vacuum of space, because you don't freaking breathe or eat or all that stuff. There are rules for chasing, the tail system, as well as vehicles. Again, this is the rule set smartly focusing on elements that will come into play during these kind of adventures. And they're given slightly more expanded rules, but without being too complex. You can see each one of these is basically just a page long, which is just perfect. Augmentations are very nice. They cost a lot of money, and they're just given very, very simple effects. So you can spend 800 credits for boosted reflexes in your neural system. That translates to +1 AC. Boom. That's so easy. You can have increased strength in your upper body. Your strength is increased by 1. Those are very, very... A lot of this is because D&D 5e is already good. I don't want to take anything away from Investigations and Androids. It does a really good job about that, but I'm impressed. I think this is the first actual conversion rule set I've read, but I was impressed by just how easy it is to convert. Not taking anything away, it just converts very, very well to where I'm like, all right, instantly I can see, yes, this makes perfect sense how you can have these augmentations in place and just have all these things, tempered coating and resistant to fire damage. It works so well already. D&D is already set up very well for this. Weapons, melee weapons are obviously less of a thing in a universe where everybody has guns, but they can still be a thing. A lot of these are, converted from basic weapons. It even uses a lot of the same terminology, so like light, two-handed. Upgradable means you can attach mods, which is a really nifty sci-fi element to introduce. This would be like the fantasy version of like sockets, I think, which I don't think D&D has that. I think they played around with it in Storm King's Thunder. You could socket in magic items to different weapons, but a really neat. You can add a choke or a barrel to a rifle, and that will give it some extra little oomph +2 to attack rolls or whatever else. I don't know if these are well balanced or not. I'm assuming they are. I don't usually review rule sets because it's hard to review that from just a balance standpoint without sitting there and playing it and playtesting it. They look pretty good, but it's interesting because in this universe, obviously everybody has a gun. So I think it's easier to balance when you and the opponents all have these weapons rather than handing your player in a fantasy world like this high-powered rifle. It does take an action to reload, and each gun has a number of shots, so that's kind of an interesting balancing mechanic. But I mean, just glancing at it, it all looks pretty good to me. None of them look too crazy to wield, but I really like the mod system. That's a lot of fun. Additional items, make sense that you're not going to have like mortars and pestles in this universe. You're going to have sedatives. You're going to have let's look through here. Drink synthesizers, 3D printers, battery cores, ammunition, stim packs, which literally sound like the Fallout stims in terms of they're just an instant, health potion that you inject. All of that works very well, and it's all added in here, similar to how the Player's Handbook has it structured. And you can see I really like the organization here. There's the way the font is used, the background paper. It looks, it's easy to read. It's got the tables, but it also feels more with a sci-fi theme. It's kind of got that like old worn journal look, which I think looks really, really well here. So I appreciate the actual physical construction. My only real complaint about the way this is organized is there is very, very little artwork throughout, which is the big thing that separates this from a straight up like professional product, like one that like WotC would put out. Is that there's no like good like full page artwork in between, or even kind of half page art. There's a little bit of art throughout. I'm kind of scrolling real quick. You can see it has a nice little weathered effect, which looks really good. But otherwise, it's just kind of little origami shapes, and I get the references and all that. But it's just not a lot of artwork throughout. So it's a lot of text, which is a little bit of a bummer. I would have loved to see some more artwork here. Of any artwork. Jeez, I actually scrolled through quite a bit, didn't I? All right, let's go back up. We are at classes, so it talks about tech powers. Basically, just replace spells fairly effectively, to where a lot of spells literally have exact. For example, Fog Cloud is now Smoke Bomb. Like it literally, like shit like that, where it uses the exact same rules. There are a couple new ones you can throw out, like. Basically, when it comes to like, there's like explosives and traps and things you can lay down, but a lot of them are pretty much exactly as they are written. It's just flavored differently, and you could, the advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, kind of a thing, where you can easily make those conversions. I mentioned that one of my few complaints about this whole thing, aside from the artwork, is there are only 4 classes that were converted, which does feel a little on the low side, and I hate to complain about it because they are really well done. You can see here they are planned all the way out to level 20, and they are really converted almost directly from the base class. So this Blade Agent, and it even says base class Ranger. You get the fighting style where you can choose. You're going to be a gunslinger, or the defensive one, or the melee one. You automatically have your favored class as androids. You're supposed to be the android hunters. You gain your tech powers, which are the spells, and all of the spell slots, and all of that shit just works perfectly in tune with the original way the class works, which is fantastic. You even have the subclass archetypes that you can take upon reaching 3rd level, which in this case you can become really which organization you want to join. You can either be part of the SWAT team, which you're more physically aggressive, or you can be an investigator, which you're more of a roguish type. So a kind of interesting bit of almost multi-classing like built into the class. And then there's even options which sound like kind of a fallen paladin. You can be a disgraced cop or a sympathizer, where it actually becomes because the idea of the Blade Agent, you are hunting androids. Well, if you want to go native, as it were, with the androids, then you can choose an entirely different set of a 3rd archetype, essentially. And you can see here they've got their own spells listed right after here. There are some new ones, Reflective Coat, Target Lock, that really don't have set trap, multi-shot. But other ones, Machine Control instead of Animal Friendship. And I really appreciate the way it's actually listed in parentheses, so you can see if you are familiar with D&D 5e, and most likely you are if you're looking at total conversions. You can see the one that it's based on and be like, okay, I instantly know how this works. It's just themed, slightly differently towards the actual sci-fi theme here. Poison Expert is protection from poison. Police Contact instead of Animal Messenger. That's fantastic. Locate Object is just locate objects, and with Find Traps. Defensive Coat for Bark Skin. These things all work pretty well. The classes we get are the Blade Agent, which is based on a ranger, the Combat Medic, which is based on the Cleric. Let's see, I've got them written down on my Code Runner, which is based on the Wizard, and the Pit Fighter, which is based on the Barbarian. Which it's a little odd because you figure if you're only doing like very few classes of D&D that you're going to convert, you'd think that you would start with the Fighter, that holy kind of quadrilogy of Fighter, Mage, Rogue, and Cleric, and that's not quite what we got here. I'm really surprised we didn't get a Rogue, especially because in Xanathar's, the Inquisitive Rogue is just a straight-up fucking noir character, like right out of the gate. So I love the way these classes are done. I love that they are all given their full-on, like level 1 to 20, and every single power of there is converted. I just wish we had like 1 or 2 more, because 4 is just a little bit on the low side. Stop calling me. And especially because I feel like we are missing some of the core ones, at least like Rogue, and it's odd that we didn't get a straight Fighter, although we did get Barbarian and Ranger, which I guess are close enough to Fighter. But the classes are really well done. You do have 4 here, so I guess for a party of 4 you could each pick a different class. I love the way Wizard is framed as a Code Runner, so that's your hacker or your decker from Shadowrun. They all have their, at level 2 you pick your, in D&D you would pick your School of Magic, and here you pick your Hacker Collective, and again, all of those are spelled out, so it's all converted like 1-to-1. Every single power and ability and trait of those classes are converted here, and that's really impressive. Very well done for all of these. Races are a little less impressive because, again, this is a very strict Deus Ex style cyberpunk universe. It's not Shadowrun where you don't have like half orcs and elves running around. It's just humans, but it's humans that can be from different areas that basically have made them significantly different traits and everything. And that's the thing that really reminds me of The Expanse, at least the books. Because, for example, Belters are like built differently. Like they're very long and thin. Because they grew up without gravity, which that's not really shown on the show because they just show, regular people. But they actually are considered like just, at this point, almost like different offshoots of humanity. And then the Mars ones can all, have their own culture and their own beliefs and all these things. So I can understand where this is coming from. From a gameplay standpoint, it's a little less interesting because it essentially turns each class into basically just a subclass of D&D. So everybody's just kind of a subclass of human. It does change things around a little bit. Some of them have dark vision. Some of them, they can't use augmentations. They'll all have different, alignments that they tend towards. Some of them do have their own subclasses within them. So, for example, Techie, which is odd that that's a whole other race, but essentially somebody that grew up in a mega city, has their own. You can be a mechanic or a script kitty, that has its own subclass. But it's less impressive from a mechanic standpoint, but it does fit the theme very well that you're all basically just humans from different regions that have come together. So it's not quite as fun as looking at the classes and seeing how all those translate. But I don't really have a complaint here because I do think it fits the theme very well. It's funny that all the languages are basically just real-world languages. Soviet, Russian, Hindi, Mandarin, Spanish you can learn, as well as I think English, and then Spacer I think is the official, which again reminds me of like the Belter language from The Expanse. I'm using The Expanse a lot because that's just the modern-day like good sci-fi show right now, so watch The Expanse, it's good shit. Backgrounds, we're given all new backgrounds. A lot of these do have some analogies to the original backgrounds from D&D, but they're very much flavored, obviously, towards the cyberpunk setting. Net celebrity, monitor, colonial refugee, corporation raised, good shit there. And maps, to round it out, we've got some appendices with some creatures. A lot of them are just people that, you know, are guards or thugs and that kind of thing. There are some androids and then some robots, including some robot animals, which is always great. Very much reminds me of like a Fallout gameplay. And then the end is just a bunch of character sheets and whatnot. I'm really, really impressed with how well this converts everything very, very cleanly and efficiently. And it's just an all-in-one conversion mod. I feel like just based on this, I could effectively, with my pre-existing knowledge of D&D 5e and this, I could effectively play a cyberpunk universe using this rule set and easily be able to, with a group that knows how to play D&D, easily be able to just change all these things around and flavor them, which is high marks because that's exactly what this rule set sets out to do, so hugely, hugely recommended. Alright, to make this video not go too terribly long, let's jump into Offworld Colony Part 1, which is the adventure that uses this rule set. And as I mentioned in my beginning spiel, it is absolutely fantastic. It's broken up between 3 chapters. It is designed for level 1. I believe they reach level 3 by the end using the milestone experience, so they pretty much gain a level after each chapter. Chapter 1 starts off fantastically. They're in a shuttle heading towards the Europa Orbital Space Station. One of the stations blows up, one of the terminals, and the players are headed towards the other ones. They have to crash land in the hangar, and Chapter 1 is immediately given this situation where there is a hole in the hangar that they've crashed into, and it is leaking into space, so they have the immediate... your immediate goal is to escape from this situation and shut the hangar door. But you can see here it's not really linear. Instead, we're given all these different, essentially, points of interest within this giant hangar area that players can go and interact with. There are like survivors in an emergency shelter because light klaxons are blaring and all that shit. There are scavengers trying to loot the area. There is one shuttle of somebody who's landed who's trying to shoot off and keep the scavengers away from them. There's a lifter the players can operate. There's a shuttle with a gun the players can use to shoot off the debris. There's all these different methods, and I love the way that immediately, even though the players have this immediate situation they have to solve, it's not really linear. Like, they can choose to go with whatever point of interest they want to and solve that crisis or not. Including getting loot, getting into combat, doing all those things. And the main goal is just to escape this situation. They can even try and just jack one of the space shuttles, fly the hell out of here, doom everybody in, and then just go around and land at another terminal. And the adventure says that's totally a method that they can do. So immediately, I really, really love the way it starts out by having this explosive, fun, inciting incident, but not railroading the players right off the bat. Instead, giving them a large area that they can kind of take things on and choose what they want to do. After that, we get into Chapter 2, which they are met by a Commander Svetlana Inesco, who essentially tells them, hey, figure out who the fuck blew up our terminal here. And this entire chapter, from what I can understand, can basically be done without combat. It is that classic, like, mystery solving. You are boots on the ground, ear to the floor, interviewing people, and trying to figure out, this is the mystery part of the overarching plot. And the whole thing is supposed to be this, detective story, but this one is especially, has like over a dozen NPCs. They are all, organized and separated. I have a little bit of a complaint here because I think it's a little too much. You can see I just skipped through pages and pages of dialogue. Each person essentially just has one thing that they tell the player, and then the player is supposed to write down kind of any pertinent information that they get, and each of these people kind of leads them to other people. So, for example, sure, I work in engineering, but I do maintenance on the upper levels. Of course, man's got to pick up side with new, and you didn't hear it from me, but Mary Campbell over in the fancy schmancy exec lounge, she's a decent source for freelance work, and you go talk to Mary, and Mary will tell you another clue, and she'll point you to like 2 more people. It's an effective way of doing a mystery. I would prefer from a DM standpoint that we cut these characters in half and instead make each one more interesting and have maybe reasons to go back and talk to them. Maybe they lied to you the first time, maybe they didn't tell you the whole story. Just because as a DM, I like to use, descriptions, detailed descriptions of people and really get into the role of all these characters. So instead we got a quality over quantity here. So you're supposed to just go by all these people, and they'll have like one-line description. Like one guy's like smoking in an alleyway, and there's a woman who's working at a desk. You get these one-line descriptions and try to go from there. And the players aren't meant to sit there and interrogate each one. Instead, they're meant to go boom, 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 boom to all these people. And I feel like players and DMs would rather spend more time with less characters rather than having to go on this big, like, okay, we just talked to this one person, they have that one line of dialogue, and then they just shut off. That's more like, even video games, when you go into a dialogue tree, there's usually a dialogue tree, whereas here it's like if you talk to somebody, it's more like JRPG, where you talk to somebody and they have the one line of dialogue they tell you, and then that's it, for a random like person in a town. This reminded me of that, and I would have preferred, I do like the way this chapter is set up. I like that it's basically all role-playing and just talking to people and discovering clues. I think that's really interesting, especially after the explosive start we had in the beginning. I just would have preferred less characters and have each one be a little more interesting and have a little more information to talk to. I think that would have been a lot easier for DMs and frankly more interesting for everyone involved, rather than having, look at all these number of characters, it's crazy, rather than having all these characters, although it is very, very well organized and even organized by location, which is very helpful. So in Chapter 2, they should find out, they should have a very good lead. They should be able to arrest the person who was at least involved in it, not behind the whole thing, but somebody who was a patsy for this section, which that area was locked down. That's why the players had to solve it. As well as there's a secondary quest that players can discover. One of the guards was actually stealing goods and selling them on the black market, which is kind of fun. They can just kind of discover this other plot that's happening, and that gets them a little more renown and money. Chapter 3 is gigantic. This is when they actually make it to Europa Station proper, and here it is completely open-ended, which is really impressive and awesome. This area is made up of like a dozen different area. There's the map right there. It's like a dozen different stations. Each one, there's the slums, there's the high-class residential area, there's the entertainment district, there's the like park area, there's the shopping district. It's the Citadel. It's the classic space station with all these different moving parts and elements. There are random encounters players can have between areas, which is a d20. I believe every hour they spend, you're supposed to roll to see if there's a random encounter, and not all of them are combat. Some of them are just kind of heavy, or nice themes or things that can happen. There's a power outage. There's advertisements that can pop up. Just different. There's destruction around. There's just a cleaning robot. One of them I'm going to read to you. The players encounter 1d4 plus 2 cleaning robots operating perfectly, though their task of tidying up the space station seems Sisyphean. Allow the players a moment of existential horror. That is very well written. I love that. It's fantastic. The goal in this chapter is that players can choose which faction they want to work for, which is awesome. This is very much like how Skyrim is built or how the Fallout games are built, where there are things you can do in that world, but the way that you draw players towards doing things in an open world is, have these different guilds or factions set up that players can continually work for. They're not married to that particular one. They can go and work for other ones. And the idea here is they're immediately contacted by, so the 3 factions, the EOPD, which is the police force that runs the Europa Orbital Station, contacts them because they just worked for the commander in Chapter 2, so they've got kind of an in there. So that's kind of the lawful police unit, and that's really kind of the proper way of following the investigation while working correctly for the authorities. However, at any time they can be approached by a hacker who's a classic kind of manic young hacker person who I think may just be literally a AI or something. It's not quite clear if it's an actual real person, which I think is cool. It's called the Dicers, and his name is Clickbait, which is fantastic. Each one of these factions, of those 2 factions, have 5 missions each, and this reminded me of the Waterdeep Dragon Heist recent D&D adventure, in that it had multiple factions and each one had a mission, but in that one, each mission was like a paragraph long. It was a very, very brief, like, hey, here's just the barest story seed of ideas for this mission. Whereas these, you can see, are like half a page long, and they very, very nicely have any kind of dialogue. They say what the players have to do, if there's any combat, if there's any skill checks, what's the result, here are the different options. It's extremely effective. It's well written. It immediately goes boom, boom, boom with all of these things, and it works very, very well. I was really impressed with the general story flow. There's even at one point, for mission 3 on the police force, the mission only occurs if players have not already completed the 5th Jutari mission and exploded the cargo unit. If they have, they can search the wreckage with a successful perception check, and they find the charred remains. So it even factors in the overlap that you can do, because you don't have to do all 5 missions. You can interweave the different missions, what I think is the most effective thing to do. The Jutari one, the 3rd faction, is not quite the same. It's you're basically working as mercenaries for the mega corporation that runs the place, and they're essentially all very, very quick. You can see these ones are basically just a single paragraph, and it seems like these are basically here if your players want a little more action and combat. They can make money. They're not strictly legal for the most part. In fact, they can actually get in trouble here by like I said, I think in Chapter 5 they can blow up a thing, which, if they're caught, then the guards will come in and basically strip them of being able to continue on that storyline. But they're essentially all combat related, and they can, I believe, let's see, if there is a link between the Jutari and Noonan, who is the person that's ultimately behind everything. I think they can gain access to the final area just by doing these missions. I think that's the case, but there's a fun bit here where the Jutari will turn on the players with a assassin that leads them up to the next area. So Chapter 3 ends after you do a full 5 missions for any of the factions, and then they gain access to the Skylift, which takes them to the next area. The bummer here is that that's where this adventure ends, because this is part 1 of 4 in a giant campaign, and the bummer here is there's not really a satisfying conclusion here, and I get that it's a part 1 of an overarching campaign, but there are ways you can end an adventure with some kind of a boss fight or some kind of revelation, and here it's just like you end when they're literally taking the elevator up to the next area after they've kind of completed it. And I like that this, each chapter here is its own zone of this space station, which is good. So you are going, you've completed this zone in Chapter 3 and you're going to the next one. It's just a bummer that it just kind of ends when you get on that elevator ride, and it's just like to be continued, essentially. There's not like a big boss fight or anything of that nature, so that's a little bit more of a bummer, a little disappointing. Disappointing because I really, really loved this adventure and I want more of it, and I think it's absolutely fantastic. Huge, huge, huge love for this adventure, to where if I enjoyed this rule set, which I did, I would definitely look at running this adventure, because it seems like a crap load of fun. And you even get some nice little extras too, like there's maps for, this is actually a combat arena called the Event Horizon, which is the entertainment district the players can join in. There's a faction tracker where you can keep track of which missions you've done, what your rewards are. It's all very board gamey, which I dig. And there's supposed to be like tails that you can increase faction hostility, so the other factions might send units after you, at least to follow you around, which is nifty. You can see character sheets, which are done in that same kind of like newspaper worn style. Absolutely fantastic. I enjoy the hell out of this adventure a lot. Let's go over my pros and cons for both Investigations in Androids and Offworld Colony. Pros. Investigations in Androids effectively and intuitively converts D&D 5e into a sci-fi cyberpunk setting. I was very impressed with how well I was able to follow along, nod my head, and say, okay, I can immediately understand how all these things work. And it does a good job of taking the things that matter the most in those settings, so vehicle controls and chase sequences and all of those things. Very, very well done. Pro, it converted classes and races along with new backgrounds, tech powers, and items. So some of the stuff is directly converted. For example, the classes, probably the biggest example. There's no completely new class. All of the classes are built from existing classes, which I think is a plus. I think that works very well and allows you to easily jump in and be like, okay, assuming you know how to play D&D 5e, like, okay, I understand how Rangers work. I understand now how the Blade Agent works. It's just easily converts a lot of these things from that class. But we also get new stuff. So, for example, there are some new spells or tech powers. There are new items and new backgrounds, and all of them fit very well. Pro rules for playing an android, including whether or not you know you're an android. Very, very cool. I love that. Pro Offworld Colony is a fantastic low-level adventure that checks all the right boxes for cyberpunk, as well as the core pillars of a solid RPG adventure: combat, exploration, and role-playing. Really, really solid adventure, and I love the way it's organized and put together. Pro, each chapter of the adventure has its own overarching storyline and setting. It's very easy to follow it, and it does a smart thing of giving the players pretty much open world free reign in every single chapter, but limiting them to that one chapter at a time. So that, to me, is the perfect way to organize an RPG. You make sure you give the players freedom within a box, essentially. Make it a big box. Make it a pretty big-sized box. Don't open up the entire world. Give them, a slice of it, which is what happens here. They move from each area in sequence. That allows you to balance everything for that level. And lets the DM be able to only prep certain things without having to prep the entire adventure, but give the players a lot of room to explore and choose what they want to do and when they want to do it within that chapter. So that, to me, is the perfect balance to doing open world stuff chapter by chapter. Cons: there's almost no artwork in both the rulebook and the adventure, which is a big bummer, and the biggest thing that really takes this away from being just a full-on, published physical print quality adventure. Everything else is at the same level I would consider as from Wizards of the Coast, and I mean that with all the praise that entails. It is extremely well put together. It's very well organized. It's perfectly written. It just lacks a lot of that nice, full page colored artwork that obviously professional published work from one of these, somebody like Wizards of the Coast can produce. Cons: I was disappointed that we're only given 4 classes given the total conversion treatment. I do appreciate that we got quality over quantity. Just a few more, I think literally if it were 6 classes, I would have no complaints there. If it was just a few more, especially because I think that the Inquisitive Rogue type is really missing here. Just a few more class options, I would have been 100% satisfied. Instead, I'm 80% satisfied. And the other con is that the Offworld Colony is part 1 of 4, so it means it ends with a to be continued rather than a satisfying conclusion, and that is a bit of a bummer. I do think there is a way to make a multi-part adventure and sell that, but I would prefer if the party had come across some kind of major revelation, maybe they catch the person they're going after, and then but they find out it's actually part of a bigger plot, or there's some kind of big boss fight. Make it some kind of satisfying conclusion rather than really just a to be continued kind of a thing. Final verdict: Investigations and Androids is a very effective and easy to use conversion of D&D 5e rules into a cyberpunk setting, while Offworld Colony provides an intriguing space station mystery plot to showcase the new setting. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson. And you can follow our own tabletop RPG adventures here on my YouTube channel. Thank you.